the talk station is proud to present The War Files. The War Files, a selection of interviews honoring our warriors of the greatest generation, World War II, Korea, and Vietnam.
Our guest, our interview with James Dewey Marsh from Morehead City, well, now Morehead City. Where are you from originally?
I was born in Madison, Wisconsin, but raised in northern Wisconsin.
Tell us a little something about your background.
Well, my father passed away when I was just 6 years old, of course, so that was a little desperation in my antics because I did anything I could to make a nickel during the Depression years, and I peddled milk every morning to two towns, Wanakee and DeForest, two little towns, and newspaper in the evening. Whatever funds we could gain from these little enterprises paid the rent, $15 a month, because my mother had 4 children to raise. My brother Robert and me and 2 girls, sisters. And we all survived rather well, as it turned out.
All right, where were you when the war broke out?
Oh, why, that's a story. Yeah, that was Sunday morning. I was setting pins in the bowling alley in Wanakee, Wisconsin. And suddenly the radio stopped and put out this blaring noise about the Japanese have just bombed Pearl Harbor. And I said to my buddy in the other pit, where in the hell is Pearl Harbor? And he said, I guess it's Hawaii, isn't it? And I said, well, we got to do something about it, don't we? And we jumped out of the pits and ran downtown to the drugstore, and we all got together with the rest of the guys who participated in setting pins for nickels, you know. Man was in there, said, listen, you boys want to go to Milwaukee to join up? I'll be glad to take you tomorrow. I got a trip to buy some caskets. And he said, I'll be glad to take you down there. No one else had any cars, no gas, nothing. So we took him up on it.
How old were you?
I was only 16 then. My brother was 18, but I had to wait until December 18th to become 17 before I could be accepted, even though my mother said she would sign for me.
When did you turn 17?
December 18th, 42. So I had a week to go, and this was December 11th when we were all examined. We took our physicals together in a group of about 30 boys, and suddenly a man came out of a doorway, and he was a chief petty officer with black rimmed glasses and hash marks down his arm, and he said, Marsh, front and center, and I didn't know what the hell front and center was. I never heard of that before. And somebody nudged me and said, get out there. He wants to ask you something. So he said, how old are you, boy? And I said, I'll be 17 in just a week or so. So he says, I'm glad you told me that. I'd hate to see you go to prison for lying under oath, because you were about ready to take this oath. If you had lifted your hand, you would have not been going to the Navy. You would have been going to Waupun State Prison. And that scared me forever. I've always remembered that. Yeah. But that's the...
All right, so you took your oath when?
I took my oath on January 3rd. I had to come back again because I had to be 18, and then I signed the papers January 13th, and my brother went on ahead of me, and I couldn't join the same company that he was in.
What did he join? The Navy?
He joined the Navy also, and also was a medical corpsman, pharmacist mate, they called him back then.
All right.
He went on to Great Lakes, Camp Perry, got in a course school, and by the time I got back and enlisted 2 weeks later, there was no room in Great Lakes, so the train that was carrying us kept right on going to Chicago. And we were one of a few thousand guys that did their boot camps in Navy Pier in Chicago.
That had to be cold.
That was cold. That was snow up to your hips. And we walked a mile 3 times a day for our lunch, dinner, and supper. We had some drills, but we had no weapons, no rifles. We had broomsticks and handles and marched in like a bunch of Keystone Cops, really, but it turned out to be very rewarding later on.
How long were you at boot camp?
I was only 3 weeks at boot camp. Very short, brief period. They needed the men. They needed the manpower.
So what did you end up doing after boot camp?
I was selected to go to Hospital Corps School, so back to Great Lakes. And that's where I saw my brother for the last time in 4 years. He went ahead of me in independent duty, and it was assigned over in Arabia, Oran, Algeria, in that area. And he became, after a short period of time, third-class petty officer. He was doing nothing but inoculating the armed guard gun crews that served on the merchant ships going to Murmansk, Russia. That was his bit for almost 3 years.
How long were you in Corpsman School?
Corpsman School was 4 weeks.
What did it consist of? Because you're telling me now that they needed men quickly. How quickly were they pushing you through Corpsman School?
Well, they had a regular schedule, 6 weeks, 4-week schedule it was. 4 weeks.
Why Corpsman School? What was that something you chose?
No, I wanted to become a machinist mate. A far cry, because even my mother was a machinist in World War I. And all my uncles were machinists in World War I until they were called. They served in the Army. In World War II, I had one younger. He was too young to go for World War I, and he served in World War II, but he was killed in the Battle of the Bulge.
Did you selected the Navy over the Army?
Yes.
What do you learn in Corpsman School?
Oh, we learned how to handle patients, how to dispense medications, chemistry, materia medica. These were all courses. And in first aid, minor surgery.
How much time did you spend in the classroom?
Perhaps half of the day's period. And then we're doing practical, what they call practical training. They'd throw you a grapefruit and a syringe and with a needle in it and say, practice because you're going to be giving a lot of shots. My first assigned duty station was Quantico, Virginia, Marine Corps, Naval Hospital, Marine Corps Base. As soon as I got to Quantico, I was selected to transfer from the ward duty, taking care of retired old sailors and so forth, and delivering babies, too. We delivered a few babies while I was on the ward. But anyhow, I was glad to get out in the field, and I was assigned a field medical training course, which was down in the A barracks area of the Marine Corps base. We slept in tents, we slept on cots, and we had periods in the evening where they'd wake us up 2 or 3 o'clock in the morning for bayonet drill, bayonet practice, which is all part of the training because we were supposed to be non-combatants.
Right, as I was going to say. Now, Corpsmen don't carry any weaponry.
No weaponry, but except we were taught to defend ourselves.
Right. How did the Marines take to Corpsmen?
They loved us. They loved us. That was the best part of it all. Marines loved us and we loved them. It certainly was a bond that exists to this day.
Where did you end up going from there, from Quantico?
From Quantico, I was reassigned to Bainbridge, Maryland. They had no buildings, no quarters for us, so they housed us in a commercial hotel with 2 beautiful granddaughters that they had serving meals for us and everything else when we'd come in from working all day up in the fields, moving farmhouses, moving buildings, skidding them off of this huge area that would become Bainbridge Naval Training Center, and chasing rabbits, as we often mention, to break the monotony of hard work. We were housed in barracks eventually, and it was just getting nice when they transferred us again.
Where to?
From Bainbridge, I was sent to the CB Battalion, 115th CB Battalion in Virginia. All we did there was support this Navy Seabees and give them the same treatment that we were giving the Marines up in Quantico, maintaining a dispensary and sick bay and taking care of our needs. Plus, a little aside, it was Captain Ware's pig farm happened to be on the premises. And it was a notorious story at that time. We had to whisper it because he was our commanding officer. He was once an admiral who ran 6 destroyers aground as we...
Part of the Great White Fleet.
Yes. and he was demoted to a
Captain.
four-strapper, and we were assigned to a D area, and most of our duties when we weren't working in the dispensaries was strapping on a 60-pound canister of spray, mosquito
Okay.
repellent, to spray all the bogs, and we put on our hip boots and spray the bogs.
Was this in Virginia or?
In Virginia.
Okay.
Camp Perry.
Camp Perry.
Camp Perry, Virginia.
We'll return in just a moment for more War Files here on the Talk Station. And now we continue with War Files on the Talk Station.
Our interview with James Dewey Marsh from Morehead City. All right, tell me about the Seabees. Because the Seabees were as much civilian as they were military, were they not?
Yes. Well, the legacy was the top of the line, carpenters, machinists, and erecting anything you needed.
Right.
Machinery, heavy machinery operators. But I didn't stay too long with them and was selected to go aboard the USS Leedstown, which was just commissioned.
What was the Leedstown?
The Leedstown was an APA, an auxiliary personnel attack carrier. I mean, attack
Craft.
shift,
Yeah.
Because they carried quite a few small craft, LVPs, and landing craft.
Yeah, right.
And that was our whole purpose, as part of that fleet. So we joined the amphibious fleet, and we left in somewhere around the first part of December '43. We were underway and gone through the Panama Canal and ended up in Hawaii to rendezvous with other ships of that same fleet that eventually went in for the Marshall Islands. Was our first attack that was dominated by the Japs at the time. And so we started there.
What was it like in that environment? The concept of triage had yet to been developed, but here you have returning Marines, injured.
Injured or dead, yes.
What was it like? Was there chaos? Was there control? Were there controls to the environment?
You have no time to even consider anything other than the training you've received to react automatically. You just did what you were trained to do, and that's you handled bodies, not mishandled them. But
Understood.
We had to do that to make way for more and more of the bodies to come back to the ship.
What was the response to your efforts on the part, first, of the Marines? When they saw you, the stories of Marines and corpsmen, of course, renowned.
Yes, they're your brothers.
And
Strictly brothers, blood brothers. It appeared that way all through the 8 beaches that I landed at.
You landed at 8 beaches?
8, yes.
What were those 8 beaches?
The Marianas had 2 of them, Guam and Saipan. Tinian later on turned out to be a very significant spot because the Enola Gay took off from Westfield in Tinian, and we were nearly arrested for driving our Jeep on there, trying to get some resupplies for our ships, medical supplies. And we were supposed to have held us back long before that. And Funafuti in the Ellice Islands was the fishing spot of the world, and I'll always remember that. But Guadalcanal, we returned many times to bring support troops back and take casualties off.
Wow.
New Caledonia was another medical support island, a French island, just off Australia, one of my better fishing spots.
Did you get to fish while you were doing some of these?
All the time. I was one of 2 people. I think there was only one other fellow who had a personal card from the skipper of the ship to fish. Whenever that hook went down, they could see us drop a hook right away, whether it be a hawser and a bent screwdriver for a hook or whatever. And in later operations, we developed a place where I could keep my fishing rods, heavy-duty rods.
How did you get a personal pass?
From him.
Well, I mean, what did you do? Why did he give you a personal pass?
Because he was hungry for fish.
Okay.
Every time we put the hook down, he asked his Filipino cook, what do we have for lunch? And he says, I'll check. And he'd come down and he'd say, are you fishing? And I said, yeah, here's a couple there that you can take a look at. And he'd run up with them and, so. And number one, Ichiban, yeah.
What was it like as a corpsman? You're seeing these wounded Marines come back. You didn't have time. When it happened, you did what your training was.
That's
but
right.
What was it like in those quiet periods, say, for example, in transit, when you thought about the experiences of the day or the week?
We always had patients on board.
Right.
So we were assigned to the patients that we maintained aboard before we could transfer them to another ship leaving the area, out of the attack area. And they would take them further on to the States or whatever. We didn't have any time to really think about it. It was
Okay.
just the process was overlapping, always overlapping each other, and just.
What about supplies?
Yeah, our Unit 1 bags contained 4 packs of syrettes, morphine syrettes, which were integral to the initial treatment for shock. Anytime a man was wounded, had a leg blown off or something, we patched him up and threw a field dressing on him and marked his head with the first one, the codeine syrette.
So you marked the head to say
so that he had one immediately, so that he wouldn't be overdosed with another one.
Okay.
So that was just a signal that he'd been
Interesting.
treated.
I've seen those pictures of them, and I didn't know that was what that was
That
for.
was just part of the training. See, and it just comes to mind now as we just did it automatically. That's what you were trained to do, and we were always running out of morphine, syrettes. They were just like...
The thing that's fascinating, and I've heard this before, the training. The training was imperative.
Oh, very much so, very much so. Because it's so ingrained,
It had
you
to be
could do it in
automatic.
your sleep.
It had to be automatic.
It was automatic.
How many corpsmen were aboard the ship?
Oh, on our ship, I think we had, maybe 30, 28 to 30.
Did you congregate together, or were you pretty much?
We had different assignments, of course. Some were specialties, some were pharmacy technicians, compounding drugs and so on the ship's company roster, and others were attached to the ship and able to be used for whatever reason off the ship, handling casualties coming aboard up the davits and the LVPs. They raised these up, and we'd had to take all these off as fast as we could and take them down to the lower decks. And it was very difficult to get a stretcher with a casualty on the stretcher down a ladder as steep as they were on these ships. So we implemented plywood sheets and cords around our neck with snap shackles on them so that we could snap onto the stretcher and let them slide down.
December 43, you're in Cologne, the Canal Zone.
Going through.
You're in the Canal Zone, in Balboa. Been there, by the way.
Have you?
Oh, yes.
It's a beautiful sight.
Have the Order of the Ditch.
Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah, very good. I went through it several times.
So from December 43 to finally October 45. So you are in theater for almost 2 years.
Over 2 years.
Over 2 years.
Yeah.
Did you ever wonder about coming home?
Oh, all the time. And that was the password. Don't worry, boys. After the next one, we're on our way home. Every one that happened that way, that was the call. You'll be going home after the next one. This ship will be going back States after the next one. After the next one. Always after the next one. But there never was a next one until the war was over.
No, that's something that's really struck me.
That was
the term for the duration.
Yes.
Was that what they told you?
Sure. Yeah, for the duration. In fact, some orders read duration in 6 months.
Wow.
Which included your travel time back to a processing center for discharge.
Now, you come to the Pacific as a third class?
No, as an HA1. I was first class petty officer when I got to this terminal point. If we would join what they call the Magic Carpet Fleet after the war. See, after the surrender, we were in fact, we were right next to the Japanese surrender, too. I never put any record on that, but we were right inside the circle. We hardly needed binoculars, but we fought over the binoculars to see MacArthur passing
the pen?
To Hirohito.
Hirohito. I'm looking here at your list. Kwajalein, Marshall Islands, Morgan Bay, New Britain, Guam, Peleliu.
Peleliu was the worst one, I think, for me.
Why?
Because we had 85% casualties in the Marine divisions that went aboard.
Did you ever run out of space for the wounded?
Oh, yes, we did. In fact, we had to move our anchorage area so that other ships could come in and take the continuous flow of the enormous amount of casualties. And then I ended up, while on that ship, there was 85, I think it was, in that burial party, in that bodies that we had to, because of the heat, they would deteriorate very rapidly. You could smell them from here to Guam, as they used to say. So we had to use sea burials to get rid of the bodies rather than transfer them to another ship that was going back to the States for a regular burial. You couldn't do it.
You're seeing your brothers die, burying them at sea, but, you're very quickly. What does that do to you?
It's hard to say if it does anything. It's just part of the amputations, for instance, that one operation there, I was on Peleliu.
All right.
They were so entrenched in these rocks, the Japanese. There were no way in the world to get them out. And they bombarded them, and they used naval gunfire, and still couldn't dislodge them. So we wasted all that ammo. And they had a mountain gun up there that did the most damage to our whole anchored fleet. And they ended up sending a sergeant, a Marine sergeant, with a satchel charge strapped on his butt. And he was rappelling down a rope, and we watched him go. He went up the back side of it and came down the front side, and as the door opened, he was going to throw it inside there and blow that gun up. And he threw it in fine. We were all just holding our breath, but it prematurely blew up. Something ignited it before it even got to the gun, and it blew him and part of the door, dislodged the door to keep it from closing entirely. So that was a plus, but it killed him, and he just flew through the air like a leaf off of a tree. No one remembered who he was. He was a Marine. That's all they said. And not much is ever said of Peleliu in the history books. That's what really stirs me.
And then Leyte in the Philippine Islands.
Yeah.
After MacArthur took it, would you go ashore? Or?
Oh, yes. And Batangas, we were ashore in Leyte and also in Lingayen, same way. A lot of the troops were given shore leave, 2-hour shore leave, that's all. And we could go to a club, which was we have one in town here, the Elks Club in Manila. And you could get a steak and a bottle of beer, San Miguel beer. Yeah, MacArthur's own personal beer. And, that was 25 cents then. Yeah, and a big steak. You could go in there and engorge yourself, and for $1.50 or so, and burp all the way back to the ship.
And then you end up at Iwo Jima.
Iwo Jima. That was pretty significant too. The Honolulu heavy cruiser Honolulu was inside of us about 300 yards, and we always, when we went in to pick up troops or to drop troops off, we used that as kind of like a shield because we figured no one's going to bother with that Honolulu, within range,
right?
Because they'd tear a new one, and it wasn't so. Directly, she was hit astern and disabled her steering in one screw, and was really in peril and she was taking on water too when we came back.
Was this from a shore battery?
From a shore battery, yeah, from shore battery. So there was some delay in which route we can take to go into Yellow Beach again, and we had to detour to another route, and we watched first a destroyer try to latch on to her to pull her, because she was settling. And they pulled her back out so that they could get more water pumps inside her and lift her a little bit so that we could probably tow her away and save her. And that took a whole day.
Now, was this the Leedstown that was making that trick into
No,
the?
that
or
was
it
our ships, LVPs.
LVPs,
Yeah,
okay.
LVPs. See, all we did was just go in and drop troops off, pick up casualties, and bring them back to our ship. That was our routine.
How often did you get any R&R?
We didn't. The R&R is kind of equal to going ashore for supplies in Espiritu Santos, and who's there but Bob Hope?
Oh, really?
Yeah, Bob Hope and his entourage.
So you saw Bob Hope?
Saw Bob Hope, saw him in several places, and that was kind of uplifting. That took your mind off it for a while.
How many men aboard an APA?
The APA had about nearly 550 or 600 men.
Then how many Marines would be aboard?
The Marines, we might have 1,000.
It was tight quarters.
Oh yes. In fact, it was 4 racks high, folding racks.
Mm-hmm.
I went down there to get some sleep after being ashore for 96 hours, and I went down below 4 decks before I could get away from the smell of things.
You'd been ashore for what purpose?
Like shore parties do, you go and you wait till you kind of have the casualties line up in a certain loading area.
So you were ashore,
yeah,
waiting to provide medical care.
Yeah, sorting out casualties and promoting triage, really, because those that were more serious than the others. And we had one radio man that was knocked down, and we didn't think he was. It hit him in the backpack, and we thought he was dead, and he was just knocked out.
Wow.
And when we rolled him over a little bit, thanks. We all like to freaked out, ready to swim back to the ship without the boat. And I'm telling you, some weird things happen.
Jim, you stayed in the Navy.
Yes. I got out of the Navy in December 45.
Okay.
And then from there, I got off the ship and was sent back to be discharged in Great Lakes. We took a train all the way from Seattle across country to Great Lakes, and that's where I ran into my brother, whom I hadn't seen in 4 years. And I was scrubbing my clothes in a laundry area there, and the loudspeaker hollered, "Marsh, return to front office," or something, and I said, "Marsh." So I put my stuff down and went up there, and they said, "Robert Marsh?" And I said, "Oh, Robert Marsh? I have a brother named Robert Marsh. My name is James Marsh." And no, we're looking for Robert J. Marsh, Robert John Marsh. I said, "That's my brother." And I stood around a minute, and all of a sudden he walked in. And I just about blabbered all over the place, and we hadn't seen each other for so long. He was getting out December 10th, and I was scheduled to get out December 18th. The commander says, "Well, let's see now, maybe we can manage something here. You boys are both going to the same address." And he told Leon to cut me a set of orders for discharge for the same date as Robert John Marsh. We were discharged on the same date and ended up going back to Waunakee, Wisconsin, our hometown, on the same date together, crying all the way.
We'll return in just a moment for more War Files here on the Talk Station. And now we continue with War Files on the Talk Station.
Our interview with James Dewey Marsh from Morehead City. All right, now, you and your brother arrived home together. What was that like for your mother?
Oh, she couldn't get it. She just cried and cried. And my dog, I cried the worst when my dog.
What kind of a dog?
It was a Scotch and wire-haired terrier cross, and a good hunting dog. And I used him for hunting a lot before I left for the service. But he was lying on our front porch, and I flipped my sea bag off. And Bob started to go in to the house, and then we saw Mother coming. I said, hold it a minute, just a minute. I want to see if the dog didn't even flinch. And I said, "Pal, don't you remember me?" And he kind of looked away. And then a second time, he responded with a little chug of his tail, and then directly he started whimpering and running down the steps and piddling all down the sidewalk, and we both collapsed on the sidewalk in that mess and in my uniform. And Mother stood in there just crying her eyes out, watching the whole episode. And Bob sat down in his sea bag, and he was crying too, because it was so... The dog didn't remember me for a while, and after 4 years, it suddenly clicked, and it did remember my voice.
What did you do after the war?
After the war, we did a lot of drinking, my brother and I, which was common. I bought a Model A Ford for $75 and repainted it. It was beautiful. And we would put a couple of blankets in the rumble seat and a couple of extra cases of beer, Farbach beer, and then we'd take off. And he'd say, "Where we go today?" And he said, "You name it." Head her north, fill her up with gas, put a case of beer down here, and on the seat we had a big wooden keg of pickled herring with 2 sticks in it. And we'd go down the road just eating pickled herring and drinking Farbach beer.
What did you miss while you were at sea, those 4 years?
Camaraderie of a beer with my brother and a beer with my buddies. And we ran into all the people who were being discharged at that time, some of them badly mauled and blinded. One fellow lost 12 feet of his intestines and one eye.
What was it like when you returned home? I mean, was there a lot of conversation, a lot of discussion here, you and your brother?
No.
Why not?
Very little. I don't know. I can't answer that. All we could look for is crank that car up and go to Milwaukee or go up north or go to Chicago or just go anywhere. Just stay on the road, keep that car going, and keep the beer coming. We got pulled over once by a cop, and he said, "Well, you were swerving a little bit." And I said, "You want a drink?" And he said, "You guys just getting out of the service?" And I said, "Yesterday." And he said, "I got out 2 weeks ago. I got discharged 2 weeks ago." He said, "Let me tell you, though, I took an oath, too, like you guys did." He said, "I'm going to give you a break this time." He said, "You put that beer away while you're driving and don't drive while you're drunk, and because you won't be here the next day to remember all that stuff." We didn't do much more of that driving and drinking at the same time.
What did you do after all this? What did you end up doing?
The VA hospital, I went in and had an interview with Colonel Trent about a job, because I was waiting. I had put in my application to go to the University of Wisconsin. Anyhow, I took that job on. I was going to do it for just a little while, and he took me on a tour of the hospital, and in doing so, I met 2 people whom I had known before, and they were, at the time they called it shell-shocked. And he put me on that Ward B, and I became an attendant. And I spent that first year there taking them down for their shock treatments, insulin shock, and I stayed there long enough to get a feel for it. And I had a small boat. That was on an island in Lake Mendota. Kept my boat tied up there to go fishing on my off time. And one day I said to my friend, "How would you like to go fishing?" And he seemed to respond, but he didn't say anything. He was still catatonic.
Right.
And suddenly one day I passed him he was sitting in a chair with another guy, and I said, "Let me know when you want to go fishing again." And he said, "Now." The first words I remembered him ever saying. And I went down and I told my boss down there that he had suddenly said a word, and that they were all thinking, was it because of the shock treatment? I got him out in the boat, took him fishing, and he caught some yellow perch that he thought were huge, and they were only like 12-inch perch. And he thought that was the best thing since sliced bread. And he became my friend, and each day I'd go out there and give him a pocket full of peanuts so he could feed the squirrels. The squirrels were his friends now. And he'd lay down, and I watched him. The squirrels would climb right on his belly, and he was in heaven, completely changed individual. And then I left again. I met a girl and got married from northern Wisconsin, and she was going at the university there. We moved on up to the northern part of the country, the Menominee Indian Reservation, and signed on for cutting timber. We worked there for over a year. And then finally, I lived in Antigo, Wisconsin. And we lived right above a drugstore. The best trout fishing in the world was northern. You'd go 4 miles in any direction and hit a trout stream. And that was for me. That's what I did every day after work. And sharpening chainsaws and axes, when the chores were done. And then, of course, I did get a call from school saying that they had received some information that corresponded with my DD 214 and that the registrar would accept me as a student. That was in the spring of '48 because I had one little baby, Peggy, and Betty was pregnant with Pat. So I had the 2 children to worry about to go to school with, and we had to live 40 miles away from the university and be trucked in each day because nobody had cars.
What were you tithinking about doing?
Well, I was becoming a medical officer.
Okay.
I was in pre-med school.
All right, that's right. Okay.
Yeah, I had 2 years of pre-med school there. And in June of '50, of course, you know what happened. The Korean War broke out. And I got a letter at the university office. You will report for active duty. And I said, active duty? I'm discharged. I had never realized that what I had done when I consented to be discharged with my brother, I signed an inactive duty copy, and I never knew it. All these years I didn't understand that I could be recalled.
Right.
And anyhow, rather than run off to Canada and so forth, like some of them did, I went down and reported in and took my place and got a uniform load and changed my life again, got billeted down on the base and had to wait until they got quarters for
the
family quarters. And in the process, I was selected to go to instructor training school because of my background, a dental technician in World War II training, dental tech school, and learning how to chart teeth and identify teeth and so forth. And then with the 2 years I had in the University of Wisconsin, they allowed me, when I came back, I was assigned a ship, and from there I was assigned to the Yorktown. That goes back to going back to the Yorktown.
Right.
And I was to recommission the Yorktown. The carrier Yorktown, the Fighting Lady, was put in mothballs after World War II and sent up to Bremerton, Washington to rest in peace with all the carriers and all the ships that they no longer had need for. But I went up there and got in the recommissioning crew for the Yorktown and stayed there in the barracks for about 4 months, sleeping in a cot,
right.
And the next ship over was the Shangri-La, the 38. We did such a good job on the Yorktown, they cut orders for us to go to the next ship, the Shangri-La, and I just couldn't understand. I said, I just don't know how I can continue in this routine because I'd rather be at sea.
Right.
So they said, if you'd rather be at sea, well, we'll put you on ship's company of the Yorktown instead of the recommissioning crew.
Right.
So I became a member of the ship's crew. And we left Bremerton, Washington, and went up to take on our armaments and loaded of fuel loads and headed down to San Diego to pick up our squadrons and went out on sea trials, and before you know it, I'm out in Hawaii already.
So you finished out your career in the Navy?
I got stuck for that period. Was the Korean War finished, and I came back with her in '55, the Yorktown.
Mm-hmm.
And went back to Camp Lejeune, back to the Marine Corps again, see. Always with the Marine Corps. And that was in 61 or 62. And I was there only a short time, about 2 years, and got orders to join the 1st Marine Air Wing in Iwakuni, Japan. So I flew out to Iwakuni, and then in Korea, the Vietnam War broke out, and I, being the senior chief out there, I was an E8 chief already, and at that time I sent all the troops, and all the doctors, and all the parts of the company, including the water mules and the vehicles, got them all put on C-130s and flown into Da Nang. And I was the last one to leave. And when I came in, we were assigned right there at Da Nang headquarters. Thank the Lord for that. I mean, to us, because I had no idea where this thing was going.
Right.
Because that was a bad period in 66. And I spent 13 months there, 66, and I left in March of 67, came back to the States again, Camp Lejeune again, back with the Marines.
No, you've been described, one individual calls you a hardcore warrior. World War II,
Yeah.
Korea, and Vietnam.
Yeah.
I'm looking back then at Korea and Vietnam here for a moment. Have you been to the World War II monument?
Yes, I have.
Now-
It was the dream of my life, really.
Now, it's interesting. Your experience. I was talking to Gene Morrison the same way. World War II, Korea, and Vietnam. We had the Korean monument constructed,
Yeah.
the Vietnam Memorial, but not until 2004
Yeah,
do we build the World War II Memorial.
last one for the first
Yeah.
war.
Why do you think that was?
I have no idea whether it was politics or what.
Well, what was it like for you? I asked you that of your brother. The two of you didn't speak much about the war,
I never did.
and yet so many of the people that returned from World War II, they put their uniforms,
Yeah.
their medals, and their memories away.
I got goosebumps just thinking about it now. They flew us up there on that honor flight.
Right.
That was the most wonderful thing I've ever experienced, I believe, ever. Because it was all members who had been there and done that.
Right.
And 10 or 12 in wheelchairs.
Right.
And the most wonderful kind of guys you'd ever want. You're real brothers.
Understood.
And we were given all the opportunities by experienced and professional people to enhance whatever we saw, to tell us all the history behind it, including we saw and even saw the Air Force Memorial, which was striking to me, this huge.
It's just amazing that you had been through these 3 wars, yet the war that was probably the most difficult in day-to-day experience is the one that was remembered last
Yep.
by the public, and I'm just fascinated by that.
Exactly. I mean, that's the one that you wanted to forget about always, but you couldn't, and yet somebody forgot about it because they never suggested making a memorial as they did the Vietnam
and Korea. I know.
Yeah.
It's amazing. Jim, I really appreciate this. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
You've been listening to The War Files, a selection of interviews honoring our warriors of the greatest generation, World War II, Korea, and Vietnam. The War Files is a TalkStation presentation.